Boldwood presents The Emerald Shawl, written by Louise Douglas and read by Imogen Church. My first child, my darling. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, speaking of the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Chapter 1. Tuesday, 25th of October, 1864. The woman was standing beneath the sign of the inn, holding the ends of a green shawl to her throat with one hand and a wicker basket in the other. The wind was gusting, the sign was swinging, and leaves were scattering across the cobbles. The Courier's first female reporter, Nelly Brooks, was glad to see the woman. That morning she had found a note posted in her pigeonhole in the foyer of the newspaper offices. A dreadful murder has been done. If you wish to know more, meet me at the Llandoger Trow at 5 p.m. Come alone. You will recognize me by my green shawl. Nelly had wondered if the note was fake, a trick being played on her by one of the other newspaper staff, for it was no secret that she longed for the chance to investigate and write a story of significance. But there was the note's author, good as her word, exactly where she said she'd be, outside one of Bristol's more notorious watering holes. The day was coming to its end. The wheels of laden carts and carriages leaving the docks rattled over the cobbles on King Street. Dogs sniffed around the corners of buildings. The destitute were queuing outside the doss house, and costermongers were packing away their wares. Lights were glowing behind windows, and smoke puffed from chimneys. And beneath the sign, the woman huddled in her shawl and waited, a picture of disquietude. She was about 40 years old, wearing a plain brown dress, an old-fashioned bonnet and shabby boots. Everything about her appearance, except the shawl itself, indicated that she was not wealthy, but that she was respectable. She looked constantly about her in a most furtive manner. Nelly caught the woman's eye and raised a hand in greeting. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'm Nelly Brooks from the Courier." "You came," the woman said. "I could not resist your invitation. May I ask your name?" "Eliza Morgan. You may call me Eliza." "Shall we walk by the harbour while we talk?" Nelly suggested. "I cannot abide the water." "Somewhere else, then?" "I'd rather be inside where we cannot be observed. Let's go to the inn." The Courier's crime reporter, Will Delane, had warned Nelly against interviewing contacts in pubs, because usually all they wanted was to be bought drinks. But Eliza was already opening the door, and Nelly had no choice but to follow her into the gloom of the Llandoger Trow. They went into the saloon bar, a long, narrow room. Paintings of ships and seascapes hung on the walls. There was some nautical ephemera, and mirrors reflected back what little natural light came through the windows. The two women seated themselves in a quiet spot close to the fire. Nelly took her notebook and pencil from her satchel and asked the serving maid to bring 2 glasses of port. "And a nip of gin to see it down, if you please," said Eliza. She put her basket on the floor, took off the shawl, and laid it over the back of the chair. Her features were pleasant, but there were dark shadows beneath her eyes, and her fingernails were bitten to the quick. She was twitchy, nervous as a kitten. In the old days, the Trow, an Elizabethan inn within spitting distance of the river, was renowned as a hangout for press gangs. Nelly had heard rumours of tunnels beneath the street where men too drunk to understand what was happening to them were hustled to the docks by the gangs and boarded onto waiting ships. When they woke, they were at sea, on their way to war, and it was too late for goodbyes or regrets. Nowadays, the inn was popular with sailors and dock workers who came to spend their money and find female company. Nelly could hear raucous laughter in the public bar, but they were the only customers in the saloon apart from an elderly man, dour in expression, who was drinking alone, and another fast asleep on a bench with a hat over his face. The serving girl brought their drinks and placed them on the table. Eliza took the gin and drank it neat. "I needed that to steady my nerves," she said. "Your note said you feared there'd been a murder," Nelly prompted. "I didn't say I feared it. I said there had been." "Who has been killed?" "The wife of an important man," said Eliza. "A newborn infant has been done away with too. I didn't know who I should tell. I don't trust the police, and I've heard awful tales about the gentlemen of the press. A woman reporter is what I need, I told myself. That's why I came to you." "I appreciate you entrusting me with the story," Nelly said. "Tell me, who is this important man?" "I'm not ready to say." "But I can't do anything without the names of the man and his wife." "I won't tell you their names unless I am paid £5. Nelly inhaled sharply. £5 was more than she earned in a month. "I don't have anywhere near that amount of money with me," she said. "We don't have a deal, then. Perhaps I should approach a different newspaper." There was an uncomfortable silence. Nelly tried to think what Will Delane would do in this situation. "Eliza, we're here together now, so you may as well tell me what you know," she said reasonably. "If, when you've told me, if I think it's worth £5 to hear the names of those concerned, I'll find it, somehow." Eliza leaned down to take a drink while she considered this proposal. Her hand trembled so badly that she spilled some onto the table. "Very well," she said. "Where should I start?" Nelly tried not to reveal her relief. "Tell me, when did you find out about the deaths?" she asked. "Yesterday." "And how did you come by this knowledge?" "I am a seamstress, by trade. I went to collect a coat from the gentleman that required alterations. I knew his wife was expecting, and I thought the baby might have made an entrance. I made a little gown for it, as a gift, and some dear little socks. But when I got there, the clocks were stopped, the mirrors covered, the curtains drawn shut. 'Whatever has happened?' I asked the gentleman's stepdaughter. 'Who is it as has passed?' But do you know, Miss Brooks, I knew even before she told me. I knew it was the wife and her child. And she, God bless her heart, was little more than a girl herself." Her eyes filled with tears. "What were you told had become of them?" asked Nelly gently. "That the wife had given birth the previous afternoon and bled to death during the night, and the infant was feeble and didn't last the 12-hour neither." "But you didn't believe that explanation?" "I did not. He wanted her dead, you see." "The husband?" "Yes. She'd heard him speak of it. He intended to suffocate her while she lay sleeping in her bed." Nelly's heartbeat quickened. If this was true, What a story it would make. Eliza continued. She wrote his exact words in her diary, which she gave to me for safekeeping lest anything untoward should become of her. When I read them, it made my blood run cold. And now she's dead. She shook her head as if in utter despair. Do you still have the diary? Nelly asked. I do, but not with me. May I see it? Eliza Morgan drained her glass and narrowed her eyes. You may, but only after I have been paid. Chapter 2. Since taking up her post at the Courier, Nelly had spent most of her working days writing about those topics the editor, Mr. George Boldwood, perceived as being appealing to women. She had nothing against knitting patterns and tips for a healthy complexion, but she wanted more. For 18 months she'd been frustrated. Whenever an opportunity to write something more meaningful had arisen, the story had been snatched away and given to Will Delane, chief correspondent Duncan Coulson, or one of the other reporters, all of them men. But this might be everything she had dreamed of, a chance to prove herself and to make a difference. She was anxious to keep Eliza Morgan talking, to harvest as much information as she could. Outwardly, she remained composed. Inside, her thoughts were tumbling over one another. When did you first meet this young woman, Eliza? She asked. 2 summers ago. I altered the gentleman's first wife's wedding gown to fit the second. She didn't have a dress of her own? He was too tight-fisted to pay for a new one. He never loved her, see? Not even at the beginning. He needed a wife because he wanted a son, and to stop people speculating about his mistress. He has a mistress, a married woman from Chipping Norton. Eliza looked disappointedly at the empty glass in front of her. All this talking's dried my throat, something dreadful, she said. Nelly signalled to the barmaid to bring more drinks. Eliza continued. She, the young woman, was available. She was pretty and bright and young enough to bear him as many sons as she could manage. And after their marriage, you used to visit her at his house? More of a mausoleum than a house, grand as a palace, cold as a tomb. But yes, I always met her there. She used to call for me when he was away so we could have a good talk without him breathing down her neck, she sighed. I watched her change. She became a shadow of the girl she used to be. Oh, she tried to put a brave face on it, but it was plain for all to see that she was miserable. The door opened and Eliza jumped, but it was only a man bringing a tray of mugs to the bar. Are you writing all this down? Eliza asked Nelly. Yes, Nelly said. You were saying that the young wife was unhappy. That's correct. Then, one time, about 6 months ago, there we were, me and her, in her dressing room. I was pinning up the skirt of a new dress and I commented that she was looking well. And she told me she'd got herself into a situation. A situation? I could see how it had happened. There she was, locked up inside that great gloomy place like a princess in a fairy tale, while he was gallivanting about on his so-called business travels with his fancy woman, leaving the door open behind him and inviting trouble to step in. What kind of trouble do you mean? Nelly asked. The usual kind, Eliza said. They were interrupted by the barmaid bringing more drinks. Eliza waited until she'd moved away, then picked up the story again. She, the second wife, was such a good-hearted soul. I admired her emerald shawl once, and she said, "Oh, Eliza, it's much more your colour than mine. You take it." That's what she was like. She treated me like family because she didn't have family of her own. You mentioned a stepdaughter? A mousy thing, the daughter of the gentleman's first wife. What happened to the first wife? She died of a weak heart some years back. But the stepdaughter continued to live at the house? For a short while. You said she was there yesterday. She'd returned to help when the baby was born. I see, and I suppose the gentleman is older than his second wife? Eliza thought for a moment. By 30 years, I'd say. My goodness. He is a dour man. A grey man. Grey inside and out. She leaned across the table. Shall I tell you how I know his wife was murdered, Miss Brooks? Please do. The log on the fire crackled, sending sparks across the hearth. Eliza's voice dropped almost to a whisper. It's because last night, when I was sleeping, she came to me. Who came? Her! The murdered wife! She was standing beside my bed. I couldn't see her clearly, but I knew it was her. She glanced about her, then said, She leaned down and she whispered in my ear, I did not die. I was killed, Eliza, and I will not rest until the truth is made known. I could feel her sadness, Miss Brooks. It almost broke my heart. Eliza sat back and stared hard at Nelly as if challenging her to doubt this account. Goodness, said Nelly. How frightening that must have been for you. My sister died in childbirth, Miss Brooks, and she and I were close as peas in a pod, but she never came a whispering to me. That's proof that my instincts are right. But even if he didn't have any feelings for his wife, said Nelly, why would any man kill his own child? Eliza finished her second glass of port and wiped her lips with the back of her hand, leaving a blood-red smear on the skin. I already told you, she said. He had good reason to kill them both. Chapter 3. Will Delane had once described to Nelly the feeling he had when he came across a good story. It's like you're a dog catching the scent of a deer, he'd said. It might be faint, but it's irresistible. You have to give chase. You don't have a choice. What Nelly was experiencing now, she realised, the keenness, the compulsion to find out more, was the sensibility he had described. Is there anything more you can tell me about the deaths? She asked Eliza. Only that before I left, I saw the bodies removed, shrouded and loaded into the back of a carriage. Nelly wrote this down. Eliza continued talking. After I'd done the measurements for the coat, the gentleman said I was to ask Mr. Lilly, that's the tailor on Park Street what I does some work for, to come and see him. He wanted adjustments made to his dark jacket and trousers so he might wear them as a morning suit, and a black band fitted to his hat. So I came directly back to Mr. Lilly's and told him where I'd been and what had transpired. I said I was certain the husband was responsible for both deaths. The alterations to his clothes is all for show, I said. It is all an act, and I know it is, for his appetite was not diminished one bit. I watched him eat 3 pieces of toast with my own eyes." She fell silent for a moment, then said, "Mr. Lilly told me I should not speak about his best client in such an impolite manner." She sighed, as if the effort of the telling was draining her spirits. "Are you sure you don't want none of this port, Miss Brooks?" No, please, take it." "Thank you." She drank. "Trouble was, I was in such a lather, I didn't know when to stop. I didn't realise there was a customer behind the curtain in the fitting room, and I kept on with my accusations. The customer heard it all. As soon as I saw his face, I knew him." She shuddered. "He was an acquaintance of the bereaved husband. I'd seen them together, but it was too late by then to take my words back." "Oh dear," said Nelly. "Oh dear indeed. When Mr. Eliza collected herself. "The customer left. Mr. Lilly told me to finish the alterations to the coat. He said he would honour his payment to me for that work, but that would be the end of our business together. He wouldn't employ anyone who belittled a tragedy by her tittle-tattle. Thing is, Miss Brooks, the work I did for Mr. Lilly was my main source of income." "Ah," thought Nelly, "that's why you need the £5. She felt a rush of pity for the woman. "It is a most disturbing story, Miss Morgan," she said. "I would be glad to pay you for the names of those involved." Eliza became immediately alert. "How quickly can you get the money?" she asked. "By tomorrow?" "Perhaps, but—" "We should meet again tomorrow then, early. Then I shall go directly to the railway station. I have to leave Bristol. I can't stay here now that they know I know." "Who are they?" "The gentleman and his friends." She leaned closer to Nelly. "I am being followed." Nelly smiled as reassuringly as she could. "I think it unlikely," she said gently. "You don't believe me?" "You've had a shock, Miss Morgan. You are unsettled, and it's perfectly understandable that your imagination is running away with you." "Last night, I saw a man outside my lodgings. He stood beneath the lamp looking up to my window." "I'm sure he just happened to be there." "No." Eliza shook her head. "I've seen him before. I know he works for them. And this morning, I found a playing card outside the house. The ace of spades. You know what that means, don't you?" Nelly shook her head. "It means death is coming." She was becoming agitated. Nelly did not know what she might say to calm her. "He might be watching me even now," Eliza finished, wide-eyed and pale. Nelly looked up and around. The elderly man was staring into the bottom of his glass, and the other man was still sleeping. Nobody else was present. Yet Eliza's fear was palpable. It seemed almost infectious. If she was right, and she was being followed, if her pursuer knew she was in the pub, wouldn't he also know that she was with Nelly? "What time is it?" Eliza asked suddenly. Nelly looked at the clock on the wall. "Almost 6. "I have to go. I need to get the coat to Mr. Lilly before he shuts the shop. I'll see you tomorrow morning, Miss Brooks, outside the courier offices at 8 o'clock. "And you'll bring the diary?" "I'll bring it." Eliza almost toppled forward as she leaned down to grab her basket, and when she had picked it up, she headed back through the bar, bumping into chairs and stumbling in her drunkenness and her haste to leave. Nelly noticed the green shawl puddled on the floor. Eliza, the woman ignored her, hurrying forward. Eliza, wait, you've forgotten your shawl. The serving maid stepped in front of Nelly. Begging your pardon, miss, but someone needs to pay for the drinks. I will pay, said Nelly. Just one moment. I can't let you leave until you've paid. Nelly took a handful of coins from the purse in her pocket and dropped them onto the tabletop. She looked up just in time to see Eliza go through the door. By the time Nelly reached it, she was gone. Chapter 4. During the walk back to her lodgings, a hurried walk entirely tainted by the fear that she might be being watched, Nelly's head was full of Eliza and what she'd said. The circumstances and the deaths of a mother and child brought back memories that Nelly was constantly trying to forget. This is something that has happened to someone else. It is not my experience, not my pain, she told herself. But the trauma of her past, never far away, crowded around her. The story felt personal. If a terrible wrong had been done to the cruel gentleman's young wife when she was at her most vulnerable, then Nelly vowed to disclose it. She determined that she would make things right. Her immediate problem was that the answers to her questions about the identity of the murdered woman would cost her, and she couldn't think how she could acquire £5 before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning unless she asked for the money from Mr. Boldwood himself. That would mean explaining what it was for, and even if Mr. Boldwood agreed to give Nelly the cash, she knew that as soon as Eliza had given her the names, the editor would take the story from her. He would make her tell what she knew to Will Delane or one of the other male reporters, and they would continue the investigation, and Nelly would be back in her women's page cubbyhole, offering household advice from the best hair pomades to the polishing of glassware. It would be the ultimate capitulation to concede a story about which Nelly felt passionately, as a woman, to a man. And all that was assuming that Eliza remembered the arrangement and turned up as she'd said she would. She'd been so inebriated when she'd left the pub that it was quite possible she would wake in the morning with a headache and no recollection of the last part of their conversation. Had the story Eliza told even been genuine? Nelly could picture Will, who was her friend, shaking his head in disbelief. Most likely she was regurgitating the plot of A Penny Dreadful in an attempt to extort you, he would say, and perhaps he would be right. The popular scandal sheets were full of stories of cruel husbands, murdered wives, mousy stepdaughters, and trouble that came calling. Will was a quiet, self-effacing, superficially anxious man, although Nelly suspected that he wore his hapless persona, along with his spectacles, as a disguise, to put people at their ease so they would think him harmless, incompetent even. Naturally self-deprecating and thoughtful, he had been a foundling, taken into an orphanage as a young boy. At the age of 9, he had been selected for a scheme designed to give street children the skills they needed to pull themselves out of poverty. By 12, he was working as an errand boy for the Courier and lodging with Maud Mackenzie, the graphic artist and the only other woman employed editorially at the newspaper. By 18, he was a reporter. By 28, he was a crime reporter and had bought a small house of his own, although he remained close to Maud. In contrast to some of the older reporters who were bumptious, self-important and chronically cynical, Will Delane was kind-hearted and inclined to see the best in people. But even he would be wary of Eliza. "Drunks," he had once told Nelly, "are the most sincere people you will ever meet. Never trust them, least of all when they're swearing on their mother's life that every word they've told you is God's honest truth." Nelly knew her desperation to investigate a big story of her own was almost certainly colouring her perception of Eliza's credibility. But there had been real fear in Eliza's eyes and conviction in her words. Nelly found herself looking over her shoulder almost constantly as she hurried up the hill on the last part of the walk back to the house in Kingstown, where she lodged. The lamps were being lit, and carriages clattered past. The chill of a late autumn evening was settling over the city. Nelly was out of breath when she turned into Orchard Hill, and utterly relieved when she reached the front door to number 12. The door was painted a glossy moss green, with a semicircular window divided into 3 segments above it and a brass knocker. The steps were clean, and the warm glow coming through the stained window glass assured Nelly that the lamps had been lit inside the house. Smoke issued from the chimney pots in a most friendly manner. She opened the door and stepped into the familiar hallway, ornate tiles on the floor, a sideboard beneath a grand mirror, matching coat and umbrella stands, and a large leafy aspidistra in an elevated pot. The hallway smelled of beeswax with an undertone of turpentine. The tabby cat, Flossie, came to greet her, winding her little body around Nelly's skirts. Downstairs, in the basement kitchen, Nelly could hear the cheerful sound of the cook, Sarah Kerslake, laughing with the housemaid, Ida Cox, and the clinking of cutlery against crockery as they prepared for dinner. Nelly was one of 3 lady lodgers here. She liked the house very much. It was her home and her safe haven. Chapter 5. Nelly took off her jacket and bonnet, hung them up, then checked the mail lying on the lace doily on the polished surface of the sideboard to see if there was a letter from her Aunt Angel, but there was nothing for her. She petted the cat, then climbed 2 flights of the wooden stairs. Hers was the only room on the top floor, in the eaves of the house, with an attic above. Ida had already been into Nelly's room to light the lamp, sweep the floorboards, and refresh the water in the jug on the washstand. A fire was burning in the grate, softening the chill, and in the vase in the centre of the table were a few lacy, dried hydrangea heads, a reminder of the summer that had recently slipped away. Nelly shut the door behind her, unbuttoned her boots, pulled them off her feet, and left them by the wall. She took the green velvet shawl out of her bag and hung it over the back of one of the 2 plain wooden chairs on either side of the small round table. Then she sat on the bed with the pillows stacked behind her and a blanket around her shoulders. She peeled off her stockings, wiggled her toes, which were grateful to be freed, lay back and did what she always did at this time of day. She thought of Harriet. Nelly had seen her daughter more times in the last few months than she had in the preceding 12 years. For most of Harriet's life, Nelly had been locked up in Holywell Asylum for Women in Essex, where she had been committed by her parents soon after Harriet's birth. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks had not known what else to do with their daughter. She could not remain at home because she had refused to disown the baby, and her parents could not risk their friends, neighbours, and associates discovering the truth. The prospect of the shame this would bring was unbearable to them. Furthermore, it would seriously impede the marriage prospects of their two younger daughters, for what respectable middle-class parents would allow their sons to marry the sisters of a ruined young woman? Nelly's fall from grace had the potential to destroy her sisters' reputations, and their futures, too. Far better, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks believed, for them to keep the baby as a foundling they'd say they'd taken in from the goodness of their hearts, and to send Nelly away to a place where she would never encounter anyone they knew, somewhere where even if she told the truth, it would not be believed. They told the family and the neighbours, and Nelly's younger sisters, that Nelly had gone to visit a friend and died while she was away. As far as Mr. and Mrs. Brooks were concerned, their elder daughter was dead. Promiscuity was a valid reason for having an unmarried girl locked up in an asylum. Nelly had encountered other young women in similar predicaments in Holywell. Some of their stories had been more traumatic than her own, and every time she heard about the way women who did not follow the prescribed societal rules were regarded and treated, the shame that had originally threatened to destroy Nelly transmuted into anger. Shame was soft and sad and useless, but rage was hard and strong and powerful. She had remained in the asylum for 10 years, from the age of 15 to 25, when she was released, thanks to her aunt, Angela, who everyone called Angel. Angel had returned from Argentina on the death of her lover, and had been horrified to learn what had happened to her favourite niece after Mrs. Brooks let slip about the asylum to a mutual acquaintance. Angel had volunteered to act as Nelly's sponsor and threatened legal action if Mr. and Mrs. Brooks refused to give Nelly over to her care. Nelly's parents had not been enthusiastic about Mr. Brooks' bohemian sister taking charge of their elder daughter, but the asylum fees had become burdensome, and having obscured the truth for so long, the last thing they'd wanted was a scandal, so they capitulated. Nelly was duly collected and moved into Angel's house on the outskirts of the city of Wells, far enough from Colchester, where Mr. and Mrs. Brooks lived, for it to be unlikely she would ever have to encounter them. There, in the Somerset countryside, she began the long, slow process of recuperation. It took more than a year. By then, Nelly's hair, shaved in the asylum, had grown, and she had gained some weight. Exercise, fresh air, good food, and kindness had brought the roses back to her cheeks. Outwardly, she looked normal, but inside, she was still a mess. It took the slightest thing, Angel dropping a pan in the kitchen, a door slamming, the sight of a woman slapping a child, to summon all the horrors of the asylum. Sometimes Nelly could manage the panic that ensued. Other times she sank to her knees, shaking violently, feeling that she could not breathe, that her heart, this time, would surely stop. She was free, but she would never be truly liberated. Angel, however, was persistent in her efforts to rehabilitate Nelly. It was Angel who persuaded Nelly to consider becoming a professional writer, having watched her drafting countless letters to her daughters, letters that she would later burn in the fire. "You like writing," she said, a gentle hand on Nelly's shoulder. "So why not make it your career?" Angel was a firm believer in women having careers, even though very few did. She said one only ever had agency over one's own life if one had financial independence. She was self-sufficient thanks to the money she earned translating letters and other documents from English to Spanish and vice versa. Angel had left home when she was 17 and stowed away on board a ship pretending to be a man. She had supported herself ever since. "You have to stand up for yourself in life, for those you love and for what is right," she told Nelly when Nelly asked why Angel was doing so much to help her. "I'm standing up for you now, and in the future, I expect you to do the same for someone else, someone who needs you." At that exact time, the first few women were beginning to be appointed to roles in the press. Angel's friend, Maud Mackenzie, worked for the Bristol Courier and told Angel that the editor, George Boldwood, was not averse to employing a female reporter if the right one came along. Nelly knew her writing wasn't as skilled as it could be, nor her research as thorough as it should be, not yet. She kept practicing, copying out by hand the articles written by the best magazine and newspaper correspondents of the day to get a feel for how to write well-constructed sentences, and making it her business to investigate small mysteries so that she might become proficient at uncovering secrets. When she became more confident in her abilities, she began submitting her work to magazines and periodicals, with some success. Eventually, she sent a selection of cuttings of her published work, together with 3 unpublished articles, to the Courier, which was the biggest and best-selling newspaper in the Southwest. These were a news story, a women's interest feature, and an interview with a young woman who had been sent to an asylum after giving birth to an illegitimate child when she was 15. For this, Nelly had effectively interviewed herself. During the subsequent meeting, during which Angel had told her to omit certain facts about her life, Mr. Boldwood told Nelly that the asylum article was one of the best things he had read in his 30 years as a newspaperman. "Heartbreaking," he said, "moving, compassionate, shocking, compelling, and completely unsuitable for publication. Respectable women don't wish to read about such difficult matters." "Respectable women find themselves on the wrong side of the asylum door more often than you might imagine," Nelly replied, the rage that she'd nurtured for 10 years threatening to reveal itself. Mr. Boldwood frowned. "I assume you went into an actual asylum to research this article." "Yes, I did." "How did you gain access?" "I pretended that I was mad," Nelly said. "How did you do that?" "It was not difficult. It doesn't take much to persuade men that a woman is unstable." "For how long were you there?" "Several weeks." Mr. Boldwood looked at Nelly for a long time. She held his gaze. She had learned to feign confidence while she was at Holywell. She had determined never to let the cruelest of the wardens see that she was afraid, or weary, or cowed. Now her resilience stood her in good stead. The editor blinked first. "I respect your courage and commitment, Miss Brooks," said Mr. Boldwood. "That must have been quite an ordeal." "I was glad to get out again. The smell will stay with me forever." She had not described the smell in the article, the salty, sweaty, bloody reek of the female body, combined with the stink of the sewers, the foul cleaning liquid that was swilled daily over the floors, the disgusting slop that had been the main component of her diet for a decade. George Boldwood, a large man in every way, sat back in his chair and held his chin between his thumb and forefinger. "If," he said, "I were to offer you the role of women's page editor for the Courier, Miss Brooks, which I am inclined to do, I want your assurance that you will stick to writing about cheerful and uplifting topics." "Cheerful and uplifting?" "Exactly. I don't want any political nonsense, none of your women's emancipation or such like, and nothing about illegitimacy or asylums or the messiness of life. Do I make myself clear?" "No asylums?" "Absolutely none." Nelly had concurred, of course. Writing about the asylum had won her the role at the Courier. It had helped lance the boil of her anger. She did not need to think of it again. It pleased her still to remember how happy she had been that day, although several times subsequently, when she'd had a strong desire to write about subjects that were neither cheerful nor uplifting, she had regretted the indecent haste with which she had accepted Mr. Boldwood's terms. When Nelly was ready to take up the position of the Courier, Angel had helped her find her lodgings in Mrs. Augur's pleasant and comfortable house in Kingsdown. Mrs. Augur had let out 3 rooms after her husband's death, so that she and her daughter Eveline could afford to stay in their family home. Nelly had a room of her own, with breakfast and dinner provided daily and the laundry taken away once a week. Mrs. Augur and Eveline were delightfully friendly landladies who made no secret of the fact that Nelly was their favourite lodger. Within an hour of Nelly moving in, she found herself in their private drawing room, drinking tea and being regaled with stories about the house's history. The most memorable of these was that it was supposedly haunted by the ghost of a woman murderer who had once lived there. The ghost, apparently, showed her face in mirrors or reflected in the window glass. She could be heard pacing the attic where she had hidden after committing her crime, and occasionally a violet-scented perfume was noticed, one that was not worn by any of the living women in the house. "But you mustn't be afraid, dear," said Mrs. Augur, leaning across to pat Nelly's hand. "She only makes herself known when trouble is afoot." "Or danger," said Eveline. "Or danger," Mrs. Augur agreed. She paused a moment and then added, "or death." It was a half-hour's walk from 12 Orchard Hill to the Courier offices, downhill there and at least an extra 5 minutes uphill back. But that was fine. Nelly liked walking. And she loved her work. She had her own little cubby-hole in the editorial office, and Maud, who knew about Nelly's troubled past although she never alluded to it, kept an eye on her and was always there if Nelly needed her. But Nelly managed perfectly well. She had always been the kind of person to eschew attention. She kept herself to herself. She had little patience for foolishness, although she never sought to quarrel, and after a while, most of the male reporters, even those who had initially been affronted by her appointment, came to tolerate her presence. Some, like Will and Duncan, Nelly regarded as friends. Others, more entrenched, made it clear they regarded Nelly as a token female, employed because of her sex, not her skill. They mocked the feminine topics about which she wrote, and were scathing about her writing. At first, Nelly had been embarrassed by their contempt, but she'd soon come to realise that her discomfort was what they wanted. She had learned to deflect comments denigrating women with a mixture of humour and sarcasm, but never to ignore them. Mr. Boldwood observed her. It was important she comported herself with grace if she was to keep the door open for other female reporters to follow in her footsteps. Nelly was happy. But she was happier still on the day she found out by chance that her daughter, who she had not seen since the day of her birth, was also in Bristol. Maud had loaned her a novel, The Female Detective, and Nelly had found a letter from Angel tucked inside its pages. Maud had been using it as a bookmark. It revealed that Nelly's parents had named her daughter Harriet. It also detailed Harriet's move to Redfield House Reform School for Girls, and the reasons why she had been sent there. Why can't my brother and his wife celebrate Harriet's strength of character and independent spirit, instead of trying to mould her into a meek and obedient young woman? The letter read. They complain she is becoming less malleable and developing rebellious traits which they want knocked out of her. Good for Harriet, say I. Not a word of this to Nelly. It would be too much for her. My brother and his wife are unaware that Nelly is living and working in Bristol. It pleases me that she and Harriet are in the same city, even if each must remain unaware of the other. Despite my brother's efforts to keep them apart, fate desires them to be close. We must wait and see what transpires. What transpired was that Nelly read the letter and that very evening walked to Redfield House School to loiter outside the grounds, hoping to catch a glimpse of the pupils, and, when she did, wondering which was her daughter. Since that day, she spent at least 2 evenings a week in the vicinity of the school, watching the girls when they were let out to exercise. She observed and she listened, until one day, in the garden, a girl called, "Harriet, over here!" and another girl turned, and Nelly saw that she was the one. She knew her as if she had known her all her life. Harriet believed Nelly to be dead, and Nelly could hardly tell her the truth. She would never do anything that might cause Harriet pain. So, 2 or 3 times a week, she stood at the railings at the perimeter of the Redfield House School garden and watched her child at play. And each Sunday, she went to the same church the pupils attended, and sat in a pew several rows behind her daughter, comforted by knowing she was inhaling some of the same air that Harriet might have just breathed out. Once, at church, Harriet, thin and pale in her hooded cloak, walked right past Nelly, brushed against her, and Nelly looked down into her daughter's serious little face and smiled. "Hello," Nelly said gently. Harriet was not allowed to speak to strangers, but she gave the smallest smile in return. And afterwards, Nelly found a hair, honey-coloured and fine, stuck to her sleeve. It became her most precious possession. And then, The next time Nelly was at the railings outside the school garden, Harriet ran over and gave her a daisy that she had picked. Nelly felt the warmth of Harriet's skin as she passed it over. This child, who Nelly loved more than life itself. "Oh, Harriet," Nelly whispered as she sat on the bed in her room at Mrs. Augur's lodging house. She let her head drop back into the pillow and held the locket that contained that one single precious hair from her daughter's head and the small flower that Nelly had pressed in a book to preserve it. "Oh, my darling girl." Later that night, clouds hung above Bristol, reflecting a murky orange light over the rooftops and chimneys, and the rippling wavelets on the surface of the water in the floating harbour. Nelly could only glimpse the harbour from her window. Much of it was taken up with the masted boats, having unloaded their cargoes of sugar, rum, and tobacco, and waiting now for the right combination of daylight, wind, and tide to take them through the Cumberland Lock, back out along the River Avon, and into the Bristol Channel. Nelly Brooks sat at the table in her room with her notebook before her, and, by lamplight, she transcribed the scribbled notes made during the meeting with the seamstress, Eliza Morgan. She did not know if she would see Eliza again, nor if she would be able to beg, borrow, or steal the money she needed to pay her to obtain the missing pieces of the story. But she wanted to be prepared for whatever the morning brought. Chapter 6. Wednesday, 26th of October. The fire burned down in the grate, and Nelly's room grew cold. She was engrossed in her work when she was interrupted by a sound from the street outside. Tentatively, she looked out from behind the curtains, but saw only the hint of a shadow disappearing behind the wall on the other side of the road below. The reflection of her own tired face stared back at her from the window. She put more coal on the fire. The scuttle was empty now, and returned to the table, gazing at the words she'd written with eyes that were struggling to stay open. Around her, the old house creaked and sighed. Nelly heard something in the attic above her. Was it a footstep? No, only the mice scuttering. In the old wooden beams, death-watch beetles tapped out their sinister rhythm. Eventually, Nelly went to bed and fell asleep. But it was a fractured rest, full of nightmares. Dawn was breaking when she awoke, a dull yellow light coming through the thin curtains at the window. Outside were the first sounds of the city coming back to life. Nelly put on her dressing gown and slippers and went down the stairs to the basement kitchen. Sarah, the cook, was already up and about. She had lit the stove and a pan of milk was warming. She was measuring oats for porridge, and a new loaf of bread was steaming on a cloth on the table beside her. Flossie was patrolling the tabletop. "Good morning," Sarah said cheerfully. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," said Nelly, accustomed to giving the answers people expected of her. "There's coffee in the pot. Give me 5 minutes and I'll have a meat pie ready for your lunch." Nelly poured herself a cup and one for Sarah. Then she curled up in the old easy chair in the corner of the kitchen while she drank it, savouring the pleasure of being free to do as she wished, thinking she would never take her freedom for granted after so many years when every mouthful she consumed and every movement she made was controlled by someone else. Nelly left 12 Orchard Hill earlier than usual that morning. She must be outside the courier office before 8 a.m. to meet Eliza, if Eliza came. And if she did, Nelly had decided, she would take her into a coffee shop and make her wait there while she went to Mr. Boldwood and asked for an advance on her wages. She needn't say why she needed the money. Mr. Boldwood trusted Nelly. He would give her the cash, and she would pay Eliza when Eliza gave her the names. And if the story turned out to be nothing, well, then Nelly would just have to scrimp and save to make up what had been lost. And if it turned out to be true? Then, once Nelly had investigated and written the whole story, she would come clean to Mr. Boldwood, and he would write off the money he'd advanced her as a legitimate business expense. He would be annoyed with her for pursuing a subject that did not fall within the women's page remit, but it would be such a compelling, important story that she would soon be forgiven. Outside the house, Nelly stood still for a moment, looking about her. The streets were morning busy. Nothing was out of sorts. Certainly nobody appeared to be watching her. She took a few breaths of the chilly late autumn air, then turned right, taking her usual route down towards the city centre. Nelly was entirely lost in thought as she walked down St. Michael's Hill, keeping close to the buildings in order to avoid the heaviest of the foot and horse-drawn traffic. She wasn't concentrating on where she was stepping until she slipped on a pile of dung. "Damn," she muttered. She held on to the side of a wall while she wiped her boot on a clump of straw. "That's bad luck, guys," said a young lad heading the other way. He was about 16, wearing a ragged jacket and a cheeky grin. "You want to be careful today, miss." "I don't hold with superstition," Nelly said. "It's your prerogative. Don't say I didn't warn you." He tipped his hat and walked on. Nelly tried not to take any notice. It was the kind of autumn day she had always loved. A hint of gold shone through the yellow of the boughs of the trees, and when the breeze rippled, a scatter of leaves fell onto the dusty road. Spiderwebs hung with dewdrops sparkled in the hedges of gardens, and the air was refreshingly cold. The effluent stench of the river was strong, polluting a city of contrasts. To one side were grand edifices of architectural merit, paid for with fortunes earned through the trading of slaves, sugar, and sherry. On the other were slums, where families existed rather than lived, where disease and death were commonplace and children played in filthy, narrow streets. Nelly's commute through the grander part of the city was accompanied by the cooing of pigeons, the clip-clop of hooves on the cobbles, the calling of the cart drivers, and the voices of children en route to school. She walked through bright patches of light and dappled shadows, past houses with plants at the windows, where well-fed cats dozed in patches of sunlight, and the smoke was drawn from high chimneys and dispersed away to the hills. At the bottom of St. Michael's Hill, Nelly had to negotiate the Christmas steps, a steep passageway cut between buildings. In the past, the precipitous footpath was the main route from the old Bristol prison up to and down from Gallows Acre, the place where criminals, including the woman whose ghost was said to haunt 12 Orchard Hill, were executed. More recently, the condemned met their fate in relative privacy within the walls of the new jail on Cumberland Road, crowds having become so raucous at the Acre that it was decided public hangings represented a danger to life and limb and should be banned. The route Nelly took each day down the Christmas steps was dangerous. Robbers and prostitutes lurked in the shadows. Vagrants sought out the darkest corners and slept there, curled on their newspaper mattresses. During the winter of 1863, after one poor old tramp froze to death on the steps, the Courier had run a campaign calling for better facilities for the destitute. Nelly had been proud to be part of the newspaper that cared about issues affecting Bristol and was establishing itself as the mouthpiece for the city. Chapter 7. At the foot of the Christmas steps, Nelly excused her way through the queue gathered outside the shop that sold boiled potatoes with pig's trotters and headed towards the docks beyond. The water in the floating harbour, contained by locks, was always at the same level, but Nelly knew high tide must be imminent in the river because a small flotilla of ships, sitting high in the water now their cargoes had been unloaded, was preparing to leave the harbour. The sailors on deck were heaving ropes, raising sails, and preparing the vessels for the less flat waters beyond the lock. As she hitched up her skirts to keep the hems away from the dirty cobbles, Nelly noticed that a crowd had gathered on the harbour side. An ominous dark trail leading from the harbour wall indicated that something had been dragged from the water. Nelly hurried towards that spot. "Excuse me," she murmured, manoeuvring herself through